Hi everyone, I'm Tally, this is Farrell and we are Bored of It, and welcome to our review of Star Wars Unlimited, a new run at a trading card game with a Star Wars theme. For 2 players, Unlimited has many of the common tropes of trading card games, but with a few interesting twists. The first set is called Spark of Rebellion and draws from the original trilogy and movies and TV series of that era, totaling 252 potential cards.
So if you want to get into Unlimited, you're going to want to essentially start with the starter set. This gives you 2 decks, one based around Darth Vader, one based around Luke Skywalker, both starter sets, and all the tokens and rules and player mats that you kind of need to get started. After that, if you want more and you want to build your decks, you're going to have to, like any trading card game, buy your booster packs. So before we get into the review, just know that we were provided a starter set and 2 booster packs as a review copy, and we also got some other kind of press related goodies like a little box to hold the tokens and stuff like that. So not necessarily everything you'll see here will be in the starter set. So I'll just briefly go over the core concepts. And the first thing you're going to want to be aware of is your base and your leader. And these are things that obviously in the starter decks, they're pre-given to you, but in booster packs, I think you're always going to get a leader and a base. And what's important about these are you have symbols on them. So the leader comes with 2 symbols, the base comes with 1 symbol. And together these 3 symbols dictates what cards you want in your deck when you get to the stage of building your own deck. Because if you have cards in your deck which don't have the same symbols as base or leader, you have to pay extra to put them into play. So obviously it's much more efficient to have a kind of custom built matching deck with your base and your leader. You'll also begin each game by drawing 6 cards. And then you're going to decide 2 of them to put down as resources. Then you're going to play back and forth, each player taking 1 action at a time. And the goal of the game is to do 30 damage to your opponent's base. And as soon as you do that, you win. And what you're kind of going to be doing is, so 1 action that you could do is to put cards into play. And cards cost resources, and the resource cost is in the top left. So I'll exhaust a resource to put this into play, and they come into play exhausted if they're a unit. You also have upgrades and events. And events, you do them when you play them and then discard them. Upgrades go onto units. So I have a unit in play. Now, let's say it's the next turn, they're ready. And now I have another action available. I could attack with this unit, and I could either attack the opponent's base just to do the damage, or I could attack another unit that my opponent has in play. But there are 2 sections, space and ground ground units can only attack ground units, space units can only attack space units, but they can both also attack the base. If I attack another unit, they're going to attack back at the same time, so you damage each other and potentially wipe each other out. So the last thing you could do is you could do an action if you have a card in play that says action in bold on your turn. Otherwise, you would just pass, and if you pass first, you get the first player marker. At the end of each turn, you're going to draw 2 cards and decide if you want to put a card down from your hand into resources. And you're always going to want to do that because at a certain point, when you get enough resources in play, you're able to summon your leader to the battle. And they're very powerful, they have a very good effect usually, and it's usually kind of the final endpoint of the game, which is decided by this. Otherwise, your leader throughout the game, they have they're passively in play and they have an ability that you can use, or maybe a passive ability until that point. But that's more or less it. You're going to be gaining resources to play cards, to combo cards together, to attack other units, to attack the base. And it's quite well done. It has quite a nice flow, quite a nice little back and forth. But let's get into the review and we'll tell you what parts we particularly like.
So this is actually our first TCG game, although we have played a fair few 2-player head-to-head TCG-like games before. But on the whole, we were, I think, pleasantly surprised by Star Wars Unlimited. It's fast-paced and tactical, there are plenty of interesting decisions to be made, and the size of the deck versus the length of play means that even with the starter deck, there's a fair amount of replayability.
Yeah, so in the starter deck, or any deck you build, you're going to need at least 50 cards. And in an average game, you'll probably only draw and see around half of that. So this means that game to game, you're seeing different cards, you're making different combos, and you're having different options. This means each game can feel quite different, even using the same deck, even using the starter deck. So I think the fun and the kind of interesting things you can do is going to grow exponentially once you start building your deck and grabbing booster packs. Although I will say that, played a number of games, getting close to 10, I think, with the starter decks. There's still some cards that are coming out that are practically new that I haven't had the chance to use yet. So that's also quite fun.
One thing we really loved about Unlimited is how quick and snappy it feels. With just a single action on your turn and those actions being pretty straightforward, the game flies by in a rhythm of moves and counter moves, but not in a way that feels annoying. In some similar games, it can be pretty frustrating to build up to deploying a unit, just to have it immediately taken out. But Unlimited cleverly deals with this by having both units take damage during an attack. This means there is always a cost to attack, so even if your unit gets taken out, your opponent has paid in blood. That's not to say there are no cards which are extremely annoying when your opponent plays them, but these are generally one-time events and happen rarely. Unlimited also provides a lot of interesting decisions throughout, particularly from the resource system. Because you're tasked with permanently discarding cards to create resources, there are a lot of juicy decisions to be made about which cards to sacrifice and which to keep. The resource system also sets a nice tempo to the game, because as you build up resources, you can do more on your turns, culminating in unleashing your hero, which is always a devastating action and feels monumental. Similarly, having the two arenas of combat and the different card types provides some really interesting decisions and allows players to make some really smart combos. One criticism we do have, though, is that these interesting decisions aren't always present, as occasionally your hand will just play itself with the starter decks, or maybe due to what you draw. Although this does lessen the more familiar you become with the cards, or if you build your own decks. Both of the starting decks feel nicely balanced, with Darth Vader's being about pure damage output, and Luke's is more about shielding his units and healing whilst chipping away. What's going to be really interesting about Unlimited is if you want to dive into this game, as you collect the cards, you're going to be able to create some decks which work in some really different and interesting ways. There's a website dedicated to Unlimited which shows you all of the cards available in the Spark of Rebellion set, and it even helps you with the deck building, which is a pretty nice touch.
We can't really comment on the deck building element too much, as we were only provided 2 booster packs. We were able to slightly modify our starter decks, which was good fun, but the number of cards just wasn't enough in general to totally modify the starter decks. And this was particularly the case because one of the leaders we pulled had the same symbols as Darth Vader. Generally, and this goes with the starter decks too, the cards are interesting, so I am actually quite excited to dive into Unlimited in the future, get more booster packs, and really play around with the deck building. It's worth talking about what will almost certainly be the most divisive element of Unlimited, the art. Because in Unlimited, they've gone for a cartoonish art style, but the problem is they've used a lot of different artists, and it means that there's a lot of different interpretations and different styles throughout the same set of cards. So what you end up with is some cards look almost realistic, whereas other cards look like knockoff imitations or kind of cartoonishly bad of famous characters. And I know this is something that will be divisive, and I know that is something that will annoy people, essentially. So it is something you should be aware of before you get in. And it seems like a really weird decision to me to go down this route, considering there's other trading card games, like you could say its rival Lorcana, which is almost being defined based on how great its artwork is.
So So, final thoughts. We think the most important element to consider is the fact that we actively want to buy some more booster packs and continue to explore this game further. It's just about the highest praise we can give it. It was a really great two-player head-to-head experience with some strong mechanisms.
Yeah, so obviously, as we said at the beginning, we don't have much experience with TCGs, so take our recommendation with a pinch of salt. But maybe it's also a different way to view it, that we don't have experience and we very much enjoy this and want to explore it more. Thanks, Fan. Now, one thing I will say is that besides the Star Wars theme, I'm not really sure what the unique selling point is to draw people away from other trading card games if you're already playing them. You know, I'm not sure that some things are so different or so crazy here that you'd want to jump. But I think all I can say is, if you're interested, check it out. Starter set's cheap, it's really good fun, and if you want to get involved further, you can. So that was our review of Star Wars Unlimited. We hope it was helpful. If it was, please consider subscribing. If you have questions, ask them down below. And also consider checking us out on Instagram or Threads, where we're posting more up-to-date stuff, what we're doing, what we're playing, what we're thinking about what we're playing. But most importantly, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.